gentlemen, this is the best show in the country. The Right Guys podcast is here, where we still believe in the rule of law. And now your hosts, Josh Hammerling and Max McGuire.
Welcome back. Another edition of the Right Guys podcast. Happy Friday. My name is Max McGuire. Here with me, as always,
is the Hammer, Josh Hammerling, the Mr. Producer. You know how hard it was not having a nickname like that growing up? You know what I mean? Or it was always MC Hammer. And I loved the parachute pants back in the day. I had a pair. I'm going to admit that right now. I had a pair. So,
yeah,
the 90s were a good time.
Yeah, they most certainly were. Especially when you look at the way things are going in the country today. 90s were a much simpler time.
Yeah.
I mean, we can dive right into it.
Quiet. Yeah, go for it.
We can dive right into it. We mentioned this on the show before, this case. A man by the name of Dexter Taylor, a black man, for what it's worth, New York resident, got into the hobby of building his own firearms. Not building illegal machine guns, not building explosives, not doing anything that would make the guns themselves super illegal. He just had the audacity to build them rather than buying them through the regulated commerce schemes that New York
Clearly a
has.
scourge of society.
Yeah, scourge of society. Didn't hurt anyone. Wouldn't hurt anyone. Literally just enjoyed spending some time in his apartment in Bushwick in Brooklyn. He enjoyed just building his own guns. And I have a picture of him. I'll go ahead and put this up on the screen now.
Yeah.
There it is. There he is. He's into tech.
Yeah, I was gonna say, looks like a smart dude.
Yeah, you take a picture of yourself next to a server rack. I'm gonna assume that you know more than where the on-off button is, right?
Yeah.
So he's into tech. He's into 3D printing. He's like, wow, this is cool. This is easy. I'm allowed to own a gun. I'm not a felon.
Yeah.
Also, interestingly enough, this is all happening at a time when New York was pretty much refusing to process gun permit applications. They weren't flat out refusing it, but they were taking 6 to 12 months to process this paperwork. It got even longer after the Supreme Court said you can't just deny people because you don't like them.
That was crazy.
So at a time when New York is deliberately slow walking pistol permit applications because they don't want people to have guns, this guy resorted to building his own gun, as countless generations of Americans have, all the way back to before the founding. A pretty solid principle of if you're allowed to own a gun, you should be allowed to build your gun. There's no reason that it has to be bought through some regulated means of commerce. And in most states in the country, you're allowed to build your own firearm. Gun control states prohibit it because gun control states want a registry. They want you to purchase your gun through a licensed dealer that's regulated. They want you to have a background check performed because their goal is to create a registry. Whether they require you to register the gun yourself or are just hoping that background check form could one day be used to track you down.
Yeah.
The goal is a registry. And the one thing they don't want is for Americans to be armed and for the government not to know who has the guns, right?
Wow. Why? I mean, why would they want that? I'm just saying. Wow.
Well, this is something that Second Amendment advocates don't like to bring up, right? I'm getting started on a new book, and it's going to depart from my last three. I'm still working on a title, but I want to talk about what the Second Amendment's actually for, which is if the government starts egregiously violating your rights, violating your liberties, violating your freedoms, you have the right to kill them. You have the right to topple that government by force, to reclaim your rights, and to reconstitute a government that actually meets its intended purpose of protecting your individual liberties. And conservatives never like to talk about that, right? It's self-defense. Oh, I need my guns for target shooting. Oh, I need my guns for hunting, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I just like putting holes in pieces of paper. I compete in 3-gun competitions. So all these legitimate reasons, right? And it's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. You have the right to own a gun, even if you can't articulate why you need it or want it. You can have it just because. But what's always absent from that discussion on the right and kind of on the left is that I need a gun because if you go the way it looks like you're going, we're going to need to take this country back by force. Yeah. And that's not a threat of violence. That's just answering the call of the founding fathers, the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. One of those rights that they held so self-evident, they shouldn't even have to write it down, but they did.
Yeah.
Right. It's the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness was property, but they didn't want it to be property because that made it seem like you had the right to own black people. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, a little more flowery language, that governments are constituted to protect those rights. And that when governments become destructive to that aim, it is the right and it is the obligation, the duty of the civilians, the population, to overthrow that government. It's a part that you don't talk about this in fancy dinner parties, right? But it's constantly there. It's constantly there under the surface. We can all pretend that this isn't why we have them, but this is why we have them, right? The unregulated militia isn't there to help out in times of hurricanes or tornadoes, though it's helpful. The unregulated militia is there when it becomes necessary for the people to take things into their own hands to fight back against enemies, foreign and domestic. So you look at it through that lens, and you can understand why someone might want to be able to build their own gun without having to ask the government permission for it.
Yeah.
Right? Go ahead.
Governments become destructive to that end when it comes to owning firearms, right? They have come destructive to the point where they have made it so they would force people to go underground with it if they had to, right? I look for the days when you could walk into a hardware store and just buy the 1911 on the wall and just walk out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm sort of an absolutist in that way. And this poor guy, what was his name again? I always forget it. Dexter Taylor had the insight, I would say, to start building his own weapons, because wasn't it Adams who put up most of the money for the American Revolution to start having weapons made?
Oh, it was all of them. It was all of them. You start looking at who the founding fathers were.
Yeah.
They were silversmiths. They were blacksmiths.
Yeah.
Some of them were gunsmiths, right?
Yeah. And, they started making their own weapons so they could throw off the shackles of tyranny. They recognized that they had a God-given right to be able to do that, right? Because we're not slaves. We do not live under the thumb of the government at this point. We never should, even though it feels like it's the other way around. But that's why it was put there, right? To make sure that when that time came, they just don't run roughshod over you, right? I mean, does the government fear its people, or do the people fear its government? And you know which one is tyranny, right? When you're worried about people in Congress getting child porn on their computers if they talk out about it, that's tyranny, right? When you've got people who are exercising their rights to the Second Amendment to make their own guns at home, which I encourage you to do if it's legal in your state to do, then do it, because no one else is going to protect you when it all goes bad. No one else is going to be there to stop the bloodshed in the streets, or just people being arrested for having counter views to the whatever government may have inserted itself into our republic, right? I mean, it's fundamental to be able to possess your own firearms. And I would say arms altogether, because what happens in the future when we're looking at some sort of high energy weapons that are portable, right? I mean, what's going to be the debate on what a firearm means, right? What is an arm? We have the right to bear arms. I mean, what happens if we have to have space weapons, right? Humans progress all the time, and so does our ability and the ways we protect ourselves. So this is the fight for now and the future, right?
It is. And what's very interesting is Dexter Taylor, after he was sentenced, or just before sentencing, sorry, he had the opportunity to address the court, to deliver a statement. And it's online. It's lengthy, but I want to read the first 2 paragraphs out loud right now. Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate it, the opportunity to give a statement. family, friends, and allies, and foundationalists, and honored adversaries. Today, we enter the next phase in the fight to protect our God-given rights from a government that wishes to take them from us and grant us mere privileges in return. To quote another patriot from another place and time, this is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end. This is perhaps the end of the beginning. And so, as we enter this new phase, there should be no question in the mind of any patriotic American as to why we fight. After all, only slaves lack the right to arm self-defense, and we are no slaves, but free citizens of a great republic, and we contain multitudes, each of us, from builder, a healer, a teacher, a statesman, a soldier, a judge, an attorney at law, a sergeant at arms, and an image of God. So we know why we fight.
Bravo.
This is not a man.
Bravo.
This is not a man, and it goes on. It's very lengthy. This is not a man who is throwing himself at the mercy of the court.
No. This is
not a man who is saying, I'm sorry, please, massa. Right? I mean, he's saying we're not slaves.
Yeah.
The alternative is to act like a slave.
Yeah.
He is not bowing down and begging for leniency. He is defiantly. Here's another bit I'll read. So it is not in our current fight because this system is as dysfunctional as it often is, as unjust as it often is. It is nonetheless our system. It is a feature, not a bug of our American civilization. Like any other structure built from man's crooked timber, it is not perfect. Judges and attorneys and trial courts and juries in the light of day are not perfect. Judges and attorneys and trial courts and juries in the light of day are merely what we have instead of the blood feud and the vendetta and the dagger in the dead of night. Knowing this, we give challenge, even as we give thanks. Knowing this, we prepare ourselves for battle in a spirit of profound dissatisfaction and profound gratitude in equal measure.
I want a pardon for this man right now.
Yeah. That is the apparent contradiction we face as we continue the struggle for the civil rights of our fellow New Yorkers and our fellow Americans. On the one hand, to hate the system, our system enough to fight it, but on the other hand, to love it enough to think it's worth fighting for. Nothing else will do for us but this profoundly Christian habit of defeating a contradiction by fully embracing both sides of it.
Bravo.
So you listen to this man.
Bravo.
You listen to this man, and you realize, I'm reading through it, I don't see a single mention of the Second Amendment in his statement. And as you'll remember from the last time that we covered it, the judge in this case, Abinadarka, however you pronounce it, she admonished Dexter Taylor's attorney and prohibited him from using the Second Amendment as a defense in Dexter's case.
Yeah.
And she very infamously now declared that the Second Amendment does not exist in her courtroom. This is New York. So if you're wondering why he wasn't throwing himself at her feet and groveling for forgiveness, this is a tyrant in black robes who, despite taking an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, declares from the bench that the parts that she doesn't like don't exist in her courtroom. No surprise, he got 10 years. 10 years in prison. 10 years in prison.
10 years in prison?
Because he basically owned 13 boxes like this. This is a box. Don't ban me, YouTube. There's no gun in here. It's just a box. A Polymer 80. It used to be nothing. I turned it into a gun because I'm legally allowed to. And because fuck people like this, right?
Yeah.
But he did that 13 times.
He needs a pardon. We should be out on the court steps with our tents, with our mini cities starting to say no more. Why are we not in the streets marching down and saying no more? Where is the justice all on this? Where are our rights? Where are his rights?
There's none.
When are you going to get angry enough to do something about it?
He is very clearly appealing this.
Yeah.
Reading what he's writing, this is not someone who intends to go to Rikers Island and just sit there quiet, right? He intends to appeal this all the way up to the Supreme Court because it is an important question. In order for, as we've talked about on the show before, under the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin standard, In order for a state
Yeah.
to have a gun regulation that is considered legal, they must be able to point to a historical tradition of an analogous regulation. So in order for New York to say no one is allowed to build a gun for personal use unless they are a gunsmith or
Yeah.
manufacturer, they have to point to a history of that being the law, and they can't do it.
No, New York
They
was
can't do
was
it.
loaded with gun
Yes.
makers for a long time
Yes.
who never acquired a license to do so. They were just gun makers. Was it no, Henry didn't start there. Where's
Ithaca.
some of the
Was it Ithaca?
Ithaca?
Yeah.
That's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, Ithaca had been there for a long time. New
They were
York was like,
founded in Ithaca, New York, obviously.
yeah,
They're not there anymore.
yeah.
But yeah, let's see what the other ones were.
There's some that are trying to race to mind, and it's like there's been a long history of gun making in New York. How many gun makers have moved out of it? Was it Remington? No. It couldn't have been Remington.
No.
Some were moving out of the
Henry-
states where they got really
Henry's in New Jersey.
That's okay. So it is in East Coast.
Sig Sauer is in New York.
Not
In
for
New York
long.
at one point.
Yeah.
Glock was in New York at one point. Sturm and Ruger was in New York at one point. Maverick. Springfield had a location. Anderson, Savage, Kimber.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, no, this is Remington at one point did have a manufacturing facility in New York. They're gone.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And obviously it's very clear why they're all leaving. How do you live in a country where this person, Abinadarka, can just declare the Second Amendment doesn't exist in her courtroom and send a man to prison for 10 years because he had the audacity to take a piece of plastic and turn them into a firearm that he was legally allowed to own because he wasn't a criminal and wasn't a prohibited person. Essentially, these are paperwork violations. If we're being completely honest, if the guns themselves aren't machine guns or rocket launchers, these are essentially paperwork violations. And 10 years in prison. It's insane.
Right? Does the government even need to know whether who has guns or not? I mean, when are we going to start making databases of people who they don't like other rights for? Right? What happens when we don't like people that are violating the First Amendment? Right? Is there going to be a database for that? Do we weaponize that? Then we go into the second, the third,
a database of bloggers.
Yeah,
of conservative bloggers. I mean, you saw what the IRS under Lois Lerner did to conservative nonprofit groups, right? Mm-hmm. They went after. So if you give the government a list of people that they have determined to be enemies of the state, look at what they did during COVID of all of these outspoken conservative leaders. Not only did the government put them on the list, but then the government reached out to all these social media companies and strong-armed them into censoring people for saying things that most cases turned out to be completely true. Like just this week, CDC finally admitted that, yes, they funded gain-of-function research at the labs in Wuhan.
Yeah.
How much heat did we get on our old show? Because we had the audacity to say that. How many shows of ours, episodes,
people threaten lives over it?
Yeah.
It was crazy. What's
finally
wild? Yeah, and it's all there, Max. But we know they want to go after their enemies. This is at what point and who's in this government that runs these things so they can start putting out these kind of judgments to force people in the jail over rights?
Well, before you get to the judge, you have to have a DA who wants to prioritize this case.
Yeah, right.
And his name is Eric Gonzalez. He was elected in Brooklyn, and I believe he was elected in 2017. He was sworn in 2018. And he has promised to be a progressive prosecutor.
Oh, Lord.
He is not shock that violent crime is up. Shootings are up. People do not feel as safe in Brooklyn as they felt before he was elected. But it's okay. He is, I believe, New York's first Latino district attorney. So that makes up for the fact that you're now more likely to be hurt walking down the streets.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, the Giffords Law Center started by Gabrielle Giffords, who was tragically a victim of a shooting, but then used her victimhood to advocate for the rest of us losing our God-given natural rights, which makes her an enemy of the Constitution, unfortunately. The Giffords Law Center spoke about Eric Gonzalez in a report they put out called A Second Chance. And they are calling attention to and advocating for a policy known as gun diversion. Gun diversion.
What does that mean?
Pre-trial diversion program. So basically, if you are arrested for a first-time gun offense, what this gun control organization is advocating is for you not to throw the book at the gun criminal, to give him a slap on the wrist, and to help rehabilitate him into the community. Now, there's a lot of good that can be done here when it's taken advantage of, when people buy into the process, right? The problem is when you do this for a gang member, they don't always choose the door for restorative justice. A lot of times they just go back to living their lives as a gang member. And now if they get caught in their probation or the parole, whatever, they'll go to prison, right? But not everyone completely complies with this. So what's interesting is you have this gun control organization who wants to disarm you and me, wants to disarm everyone watching this show, ban practically every semi-automatic gun, even wants to change the Constitution to do it. This is what they said in this. In jurisdictions across the country, a disproportionate number of young men of color, like the guy in this article, Kevin, face lengthy prison sentences for non-violent gun possession offenses. Okay.
Well, didn't the other guy, isn't he really unviolent? Well, where's the violence of this guy here?
So where's the outcry for this man of color?
Yeah.
Charged with non-violent gun possession offenses, a first-time offender, never before gotten in trouble with the law. Where is the push for him to be treated respectfully and lovingly through a pre-trial diversion? It wasn't there. Josh, they threw the book at this guy. They threw the book at him. I'm going out on a limb here.
I'm going out on a limb. I'm thinking it might have to do with the way he views government. I think that's why he's in jail. Because obviously he is living as a free American, throwing off the shackles of government, right? So they clearly had to go after him with a bigger sentence because he's just too dangerous. He's just too dangerous, Max. He's out there thugging. Wait, he's not doing that. Is he out there selling drugs? No. Probably not.
He's not pimping.
He's not pimping.
No, he just works in
works
tech.
A server room.
He thinks it's cool that he can push a button on his computer and in a couple hours a 3D printer can pop out of the gun.
Yeah.
Josh, when he was indicted in 2022, how many counts do you think they charged him with? Understanding that in this progressive prosecution, when the gun control organizations are actually pressuring this DA to not over prosecute, where if someone is caught convicting doing a bunch of crimes, the prosecutor will actually allow him to plead down to a misdemeanor to hide the other violations.
Really?
How many counts do you think were part of this indictment?
I'm going to just take shooting in the dark here, like 8. Just 8. Because like 8 boxes or something like that.
Higher.
So, did they pop them for one for each thing? 13.
Higher.
You're kidding.
Mm-hmm. Keep going.
17.
Higher.
20.
Higher.
24.
Higher.
28.
Higher.
30.
Higher.
33.
Higher. 37. 37 count indictment.
They gave him so was the charge for each and every item? Did he have like a trigger mechanism?
Every freaking
You're kidding.
Item. He had there are multiple counts of second, third, and fourth degree criminal possession of a weapon, criminal possession of a firearm, violating the prohibition on unfinished frames or receivers, one count of unlawful possession of pistol ammunition. But the other thing is his bail was just set at $50,000. So on the one hand, this guy's apparently a menace to his community. A guy who's so smart and so savvy, he can build a gun in his home with just plastic and some unregulated parts. But at the same time, they let him out with $50,000 bail.
What about cashless bail for half of those folks in New York? I mean, how many times have we heard that they're back on the street in less than 24 hours? It's a revolving door. This guy's got to come up with 50 G's.
Yeah, 50 G's. 50 G's. So 4 rifles, 5 handguns.
Oh my God.
4 more rifles, 8 lower receivers for rifles, 5 lower receivers for handguns. That's not really true. It's just a receiver.
Yeah.
4 rifle magazines, 7 pistol magazines, 4 upper receivers, casings. They got them on the casings, Josh.
What?
Bullet primers and gunpowder to build ammunition, and various tools used to build firearms. They said he purchased $10,000 of parts and equipment, which for 13 guns isn't a crazy amount.
No,
you realize he also bought a 3D printer.
Yeah, and first off, he's really spin savvy. Like, I'm going to tip my hat to him on that one. Right? He knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
But Max, how can you say that a primer or parts of a bullet is somehow a firearms violation? A piece that is required in the function of a firearm so one could defend themselves, right? Or it doesn't even matter what you do with it. You have a right to it, right?
Yeah. No,
it doesn't matter.
It's actually worse than that in some places. In Washington, D.C., you need a permit to purchase or possess pistol ammunition, any ammunition for that matter. And there have been people who have been criminally charged because they went on a archaeological dig, and they took home a bullet from the Civil War. All not rusty, but all like kind of coated in grime and gunk. You can't fire. I mean, you could conceivably shoot it out of something, right? But
maybe, yeah.
It is not a weapon. It is not a weapon. There have been people who have been criminally charged for possessing antique Civil War already fired and deformed bullets.
That's total insanity. There's no.
It's a sickness.
It is. It's. I mean, they called it Trump derangement syndrome. It sounds like it's liberal derangement syndrome. Like it's everything that is liberalism is anti-American now. Like that is the position that feels like it is taken. Right? He committed no crimes. What happens if he had reloaded? Because not only would he have possessed
that's in there too.
Did he have a reload? Dear God, he reloaded his own ammunition?
Yeah, because he had casings, bullet primers, and gunpowders. They treated him as like conspiracy to produce bullets. Yeah, no, they hit him with everything. They hit him with absolutely everything. Meanwhile, if someone is involved in an actual gang-related shooting, right?
Yeah.
And shoots at someone, these prosecutors are letting them plead down to lesser charges.
Unbelievable.
All in the name of progressive prosecuting.
Then how much time are those peeps doing? I mean, what are they getting handed down?
Well, we can go through this. We can go.
I
have us ready to go through this. But let's just remember the guy's name. Remember his face. Here we go. This is Eric Gonzalez. First Latino district attorney. So let's see how good of a job he's doing. 10 years in prison for Dexter Taylor for having the audacity to turn pieces of plastic and pieces of aluminum into guns without asking for the government's permission first. Never hurt anyone, never threatened anyone. More than content with just living his life in his apartment, just being left alone. What do you think, Mr. Producer? Let me pull up my list so I can know which ones I'm going to first. What do you think the sentence was? What do you think the sentence was for someone who was caught assaulting a cop, a known Crips gang member? Caught assaulting a cop. What do you think the sentence was?
So I would say that's like a 5 to 10 year, like a 5-year sentence, like just assault on the cop. 5 years. I'd say 5 years.
10 days. This DA, I hate these ads. This DA, reputed Crips gangbanger Courtney Thompson, was indicted, and Brooklyn DA Eric Gonzalez let him off with just 10 days of community service.
Wow.
For beating 2 cops. Should have faced 4 years in prison. But nope.
I'm sure it was a fight. I'm sure it was a fight. 10 days. 5 years would probably be like I was thinking a max sentence, like 1 year for beating up some cops and having some, but I don't know. Wow.
Same prosecutor. So if you build guns in your house, you're going to get 10 years. But if you actually beat up a cop and you're a known gangbanger in the
Banger.
Crips,
Yeah, that's why I went 5 years.
not like suspected. They know he does other
yeah.
things. 10 days. 10 days community service.
In community service, he was back out the same day.
Not even in prison. 10 days community service.
What do you want to bet? He was gangbanging the next day.
He might have been held during this. I don't know. But after he was sentenced, he only had to serve 10 days of community service after that.
Unreal.
Josh, what do you think the crime was for a radical Palestinian supporter attacking a Jewish person on the street, punching him in the head? What do you think the sentence was for this gruesome hate crime?
So it feels like a hate crime. I know that sometimes they like double sentences. So I'd say 2.5 years to 4 at least, because that's a hate crime. And it depends on how bad they hit him too. Like, did they beat the living snot out of him? Did they use a weapon? Like all that stuff, right?
Eric Gonzalez settled for 2 months. Suleiman Othman will serve just 2 months in prison for punching a Jewish man for no reason on the streets of New York. 2 months. That's the same prosecutor.
It's the same dude?
Yeah.
Holy.
Here's a question.
Yeah.
There's some really evil people.
Yeah, and dude gets 30 years for making his own guns.
Yeah. 10 years. 10 years.
10 years. 10 years. 10 years.
If they had taken every single charge to trial, he could have gotten life. Right?
Yeah, it would have been the rest of his life.
37 felonies. This DA brought a case against a man who was accused of sexually assaulting a 9-year-old girl repeatedly, numerously, over 2 years. So this girl was sexually assaulted by a man from when she was 9 years old through when she was 11 years old. This DA brought a case against that monster. How many years do you think that guy got and the DA sought?
10 to 25. 10 to 25 at least. You're talking about sexual assault.
7 years. 7 years. So you start looking at these cases and you're like, the guy bought 13 boxes of plastic and little pieces of metal, never hurt anyone. He's going to be in prison longer than the guy who raped a girl for 2 years over and over and over and over and over again. Sexually assaulted her for 2 years over and over and over and over and over again. How this doesn't make sense. This has to just be based on this crazy fear and hatred of guns, hoplophobia. How can you send a guy to prison for 10 years when the serial child abuser, child molester is going to go for less? We can just keep going. Here's a case.
Shocking.
Where a guy got 3 to 9 years because he caused a crash that killed someone and then fled the scene.
Oh my goodness. That's like a 15-year run.
Manslaughter and then leaving the scene. Like if it's an accident, it's an accident, right? You're still going to have to pay for what you do. Sure. But it's not murder if you accidentally cause a crash. But when you cause a crash and then you flee. And someone dies, well, that's vehicular manslaughter and fleeing the scene of a crime. Yeah. You would think that someone who kills someone would go to prison for longer than someone who just so happened to buy a few boxes like this. But no, the boxes are the bigger threat to society. Josh, imagine you stole $1 million from like 6 people, took all their savings, ruined their lives.
Yeah.
How many years should someone go to prison for stealing $1 million from 9 victims?
I'd say 2 to 5 years for each.
Ponzi scheme.
In a Ponzi scheme? Okay.
Post Madoff. We're all aware of this.
Right.
The public wants blood. Someone runs a Ponzi scheme, steals $1 million from 9 people, ruins their life. They're not going to be made whole. How many years should they go away?
7 to 15 for each charge, but they'll probably flee down to like something stupid.
3 to 5. Sorry, 3.5 to 7. 3.5 to 7 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yep. Less than the guy who just put some parts together and built guns. Never hurt anyone. Exercised the Second Amendment right. Less.
Holy crap.
Do you know what's crazy though? This is the crazy part.
Well, it's all crazy. Keep going.
If Dexter Taylor had taken one of those guns and had actually shot a police officer with them, precedent dictates that he actually could have gone to prison for less time, because there was a man put in prison by Eric Gonzalez who was sentenced to 9.5 years for opening fire on a police officer and injuring them. This is the world we live in. It is actually, you get more time just for being a hobbyist. Oh, wow, this is cool, building guns. More time in prison than the guy who actually shoots at police and injures them. I say injure him because the bullet didn't hit him, but he shot the window and the windshield and the glass, like he was peppered with glass, and he had to have it surgically removed. It was not fun. 9.5 years. So this guy will actually get out first.
Max, they've incentivized criminality. Mm-hmm. They have made the criminals the norm and the norm criminals.
Yeah.
I would move out of New York.
Yeah. Yeah, move the hell out of New York. Now you understand why the gun manufacturers are moving out of New York. New York has treated the act of manufacturing a gun and having a paperwork violation in the process the equivalent, actually worse, than shooting at a cop. So of course Remington doesn't want to build in New York, because they've set the precedent that if Remington forgets to check a box on a form, their executives can go to prison. You know what I mean? Like it's insane.
Not only that, anybody that touched the gun down the production line could be charged with the crime because they were in the act of manufacturing too.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
These next 3 crimes, the guy went away for 10 years. But I want to show you what a 10-year sentence is usually doled out for. Not buying a few boxes of polymer 80 parts and drilling a couple holes in them. No, 10 years was doled out for someone for arson. Lit his apartment on fire and it almost killed his neighbors in the other apartment next door. 10 years for arson.
Wow.
10 years for sex trafficking a teenager. This defendant lured an innocent teenager from her home in Ohio to New York, promising to fulfill her dream of a modeling career, but instead he horrifically exploited her in a sex trafficking nightmare.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, sex traffickers, same prison sentence. Same prison sentence. 10 years for trying to stab someone to death in the subway.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they have taken this poor man and have given him the same kind of penalty as violent criminals.
Yep.
And all he did was drill holes in plastic.
Holes in plastic, holes in aluminum, and make an item that he's legally allowed to own, but he didn't want to purchase.
Oh, dear God.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
What do you think the sentence would be for someone who ignores a one-way street sign, drives the wrong way down the street, causes a crash, and kills a toddler, a baby?
5 to 10, maybe 15, depending if they were drunk or not.
It's in there. They got 9, but still killed a baby less than the guy who drilled some holes in pieces of plastic. What about a violent carjacking? Violent carjacking.
Oh my gosh. That's like anybody died?
Injuring a toddler and 3 others. So 4 counts of assault plus violent armed carjacking.
15 to 20 at least.
9
years in prison.
9. What about a case of, I know you know this one. What about the case of the former NYPD officer who was charged and convicted of sexually molesting a child? Now, on the one hand, you have sexual molestation, which is terrible that you throw the book at him. But on the other hand, you have the person committing the crime is a peace officer. He's someone who has sworn an oath to not only uphold and defend the law, but to protect his community. To violate that oath in the most heinous, disgusting manner deserves an elevated charge.
Yeah.
Right?
The public trust has been breached there.
Yes.
Sexual assault, you said?
Yes.
25 to 30.
No. 8. This guy will get out before Dexter Taylor. He was sentenced last year. He'll get out before Dexter Taylor.
What's crazy is those are the prescribed sentences. As the DA continues their career, he could shorten those on not appeals, but especially during the paroling process. So imagine that there's going to be fudging in these numbers too, isn't there, Max? I mean, with this DA's here, he has a lot of power to do those sort of crazy things, right?
At the end of the day, it's the judge who decides, but it's the
Okay.
DA who's going to make the case and bring the charges sufficient for how long they want to put this guy away, right? So when you have a case like this and you catch someone doing something horrible, heinous, if you want to put them the right way for the rest of their life, chances are you probably could, by fleshing out all of the charges and presenting a case before the judge that convinces him or her that the sentences deserve to be served one after another and not at the same time, right? You could do that and you could get a pretty lengthy sentence out of it. And you see, like,
unbelievable.
You hear this is District Attorney Alex Gonzalez. He's kind of mimicking what we were just saying, right? And this isn't us. This is a biblical verse, right? To whom much is given, much is expected. When you are given that badge, that New York Police Department badge, you are expected to be better than just a law-abiding citizen, right?
Yeah.
You're expected to go above and beyond. 8 years. He will get out of prison before Dexter Taylor. And the district attorney, you'll see he's not complaining he didn't get enough time. He is saying that today's sentence means he has been brought to justice. This is a good sentence according to the DA.
This is a bastardization of the law to the worst degree. This is worse than some sort of mutant, right? This thing, and it's growing. Like this sort of thing is metastasizing in all these liberal cities. This is on the menu wherever you live soon, right? And they're trying to get more and more, because I have a feeling that Soros is still putting in a bunch of dark money to try to get DAs like this everywhere.
Yeah.
So this movie will be playing out in your towns soon, with your children, with you.
To anyone just joining, welcome. We're talking about this really horrific case of Dexter Taylor, man who was just sentenced to 10 years in prison for having the audacity of building his own firearms at home. He's not a prohibited person. He's legally allowed to own a gun. He just didn't want to buy them. And we're talking about how the district attorney in that case, Eric Gonzalez, he got a 10-year conviction from the judge, Abinadarka, who infamously declared that the Second Amendment doesn't exist in her courtroom. And what we're doing on this podcast is we are walking through the other cases that this man has brought in the last couple of years of people who have committed much more heinous crimes and either gotten the same amount of time in prison or less. Same amount or less.
This is too much.
So what would you do? What would you do if someone drives drunk and while driving drunk crashes and kills someone?
Oh, that's with the person's death.
It's not
15 to 30, depending on that.
Yeah, it's not manslaughter, right? Because they got drunk, so it's aggravated, right?
Yeah.
It's vehicular homicide.
You almost add 10 to 15 years right on top for just that.
Yeah. So what do you think that would be?
20 to 30, at least 20 to 30 in federal prison.
Let me see what the standard is in New York. So vehicular manslaughter in the first degree in New York is a Class C felony. It means that you can get up to 15 years in prison. But in this case, the guy got 2 to 6 years.
Wow, what a lawyer.
2 to 6 years. Yeah.
Oh my, announced that the Staten Island has been sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison following his guilty plea. Second degree manslaughter.
This isn't the DA coming out and saying we wanted more and we didn't get it, right? Because if he said that, then you'd have to at least give him some props that, like, this is a Class C felony. It is punishable by up to 15 years in prison, and we disagree with the judge's decision to only give him 2 to 6. No, the DA in this case came out and said, quote, "This defendant's reckless decision to get behind the wheel after drinking alcohol cost an innocent woman her life and endangered many others. He has now been held accountable for his criminal conduct." He's saying, case closed, 2 to 6 years.
Yeah.
I did my job.
And I'm out.
I'm out. So this guy could get out in 2 years Actually, conceivably, he could get out less with
Less.
overcrowding and
Yeah.
good behavior.
Yeah.
He could get out less. So
Yeah.
you could conceivably kill someone in the state of New York
Trump.
for your own reckless, drunk actions, and you could spend less than 1/5 the amount of time that someone spends in prison for putting some holes in pieces of plastic.
The audacity to exercise your Second Amendment right. I mean,
no, doesn't exist. This is
not
New
in
York,
that courtroom. Yeah, it's New York.
New York,
It just
damn it.
apparently. I mean, which other ones do they throw away then? Do they just piecemeal that, or are they like? I mean, is it for the rich who get to exercise their rights, or is it everybody?
It's the police, it's the National Guard,
Okay.
and it's the bodyguards, like the armed bodyguards.
Got it. What about
that's who the founders were intending?
What about the criminals in the street? They're carrying guns, and if they're carrying guns, and everyone else carries guns, I'm just saying. That's the word you're looking at. And how much violence are we looking at in the streets of New York City these days? Crime's up here. Crime is up.
Let me ask you this one. Because we have a little bit of time. We have a few more of these. This one was an interesting one. I didn't really know when I first saw this how long someone like this should get. What kind of prison sentence would you seek for someone who forged a bunch of documents and stole someone's home from them?
Oh my gosh, I hate this one. Like that title theft stuff. Oh
yeah.
Man,
and the person it's an 89-year-old woman. So you made an 89-year-old woman homeless through grand larceny and forgery. Taking advantage of her, stealing it, and then selling it while she was living in it with relatives.
And profiteering from it.
Yes.
15 to 20. Like once you put those three together, and I was at DA, I'd want to put all of it back to back.
They got 10 years too. So Dexter Taylor should never have gotten into the firearm hobby. He should just have stolen a home from an elderly woman, and he would have the same result.
Unbelievable.
Is this crazy?
And this person's going to be back on the streets. They're going to do it again, most likely. Yes. I'm not saying they are, but that's what happens, right? The recidivism part of it. But all Dexter did was make some guns, Max. All he did was have possession of stuff he's allowed to have.
Well, they've argued that some of them are assault weapons. But that's another constitutional claim that you have no right to ban that.
Yeah.
But most of them were not assault weapons. We covered earlier 9.5 years for someone who actually opened fire on a police officer, striking him from the glass, struck him and had to be removed and everything. What do you think the prison sentence, this same DA, what do you think the prison sentence he secured is for a man who walked into a mall and tried to kill a bunch of people and wounded 2 teenage boys?
Oh my gosh. I would want to
open fire inside of a sneaker store, wounded 2 boys.
30 years.
No, we're not talking about a good DA. We're talking about Eric Gonzalez. Put aside the bit.
Okay, 15 years. 30 years you should get for wounding 2 kids in a store with a gun.
I said at the start, every case I'm talking about either has the same amount of time or less than Dexter Taylor.
15.
How many?
Oh, okay. 9.5. Like in a real world, though, 10 to 15 years would not be bad for this.
In a real world, the guy who shoots and injures 1 cop should have less prison time than a guy who shoots and injures 2 kids, right? But no, this DA got 9 years. 9 years. And again, he's not complaining that the judge didn't give more. He says, we have no tolerance for violence, and this sentence sends a clear message that gun crime in Brooklyn will be met with serious consequences. He counts this as a win. It's insane. It's insane, Josh. And this is what I'm talking about. They're going easy on actual gun crimes. Yeah. They're going easy on actual attempted murders, on actual assault with a deadly weapon, because they have this narrative that there's too many black and brown people in prison on gun crimes. So the solution isn't to stop having them commit gun crimes. No, the solution is to stop prosecuting the gun crimes. It's like a hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. If we don't prosecute it, is it really happening? But the only one they actually throw the book at, the only one, Josh, I'm looking through all these cases. The only gun crime I've seen that this guy threw the book at him is the guy just sitting in his living room, Just like,
Yeah.
oh, I drill a hole here, drill a hole here. Wow, yay, I built a gun.
There's no
Threw the book at
victim.
him.
There's no victim in
No.
his crime. You know, there's a victim in almost all these other crimes.
Yeah.
Right? This is I'm kind of really flabbergasted by this because it's like you are just incentivizing the people who want to commit crimes to be the ones in possession of weapons.
Yeah.
Right? You're telling them that it's not going to be that long of a sentence. You're only going to do a dime or less for shooting somebody, right? And there's plenty of people on the streets who will take that gamble. There's plenty of people in the streets that'll do it over and over, right? And that's assuming that they can't claim some sort of gang violence in a self-defense, right? Because they're trying to cut back on gang gun violence, right?
Yeah.
And then in reducing those sentences, you know,
there have been gang members who have beaten gun crimes because they weren't prohibited persons. They had bought the guns legally, and not New York, but like states where there's no like private background checks, where they bought them legally. They're not a prohibited person, and they were defending themselves against someone who wasn't legally allowed to own a gun, right? So the Second Amendment, conceivably, as long as you're not using a gun to commit another crime, if you're a gang member, fine, you deserve to be prosecuted for those other things. But if you're sitting at home minding your own business and someone kicks down your door to try and kill you and your family, the Second Amendment still gives you the right to defend yourself in that situation. Not that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be held accountable for everything else you do, but everything else you do doesn't mean you have no right to defend yourself if you're sitting at home and someone tries to assassinate you and yours. All right, we have a couple more minutes. Let's go through these quickly.
Here we go. Let's see if I can get it right on the money.
How many years for sexually assaulting a 13-year-old?
I'm going to say 4.5. 4.5.
Oh, he got 10.
Oh, we got 10 for that one.
But the same amount of time. As Dexter Taylor. Okay, what about someone who sexually traffics two girls? Right? So if someone sexually trafficked one girl, they got like 9 years.
Okay. I'm going to say 8
years do you think?
On this one. I'm saying 8 on this one. 8.
10.
10. Okay. Wow.
10.
So apparently if you just traffic 2 girls, you're as bad as, you know.
And let's be clear, they were pimped.
That other guy.
They forced a 16-year-old friend to run away and perform sex acts for money. And now we have the last one.
That's terrible.
What do you think? What do you think the sentence was for another person caught pimping a 16-year-old girl?
4.5 years.
A little bit more than that, 8.5. But again, still less than Dexter Taylor.
Yeah.
So I don't want to create the impression that nothing gets charged over 10 years. There are people who have, under this district attorney, have been sentenced to 20, 25, 30 years, even life sentences for committing heinous crimes. But the point I'm trying to make is all of these cases had charges dropped. They didn't throw everything they could at them, right? All of these cases either got the same amount of years in prison as Dexter Taylor or fewer years in prison. Wow. And they were all doing much more heinous, much more violent stuff or things.
Take it a step further. There was no violent crime in Dexter's case. The only crime he has committed is being a hobbyist, is being smart enough to do it. The only crime he has committed is just exercising what he believes in, right? He does not need the state or the federal government's permission, but yet he lives in a world where he does. Yeah. And when he doesn't bend the knee to him, they send him to prison for 10 years.
We live in a crazy world. If we can say with a straight face that Dexter Taylor, someone who had never committed a crime before, would have had a better shot before that judge if he had shot someone and injured them.
I can't believe you're saying
right?
You can make that like that's a true statement, right?
The people that this prosecutor, Eric Gonzalez, the people that this prosecutor brings charges against who shoot and injure people go to prison for half or fewer years. Like it's like there's like, oh, you shot and injured someone. Okay, 6 years. Oh, you shot a cop.
Yeah.
Oh, you'll get out before Dexter Taylor.
I'll give you 6.
Oh, you shot 2 kids in a sneaker store. Oh, you'll go away for less time. It's crazy. It's crazy. But the point of this is that the left doesn't see it as crazy, because when the left looks at you, Josh, or me, or anyone watching the show, if you're a Second Amendment advocate, if you're a gun hobbyist, they look at you as just as dangerous as the gang member, because they look at you as a criminal who just hasn't committed a crime yet. To them, you aren't deserving of the right to keep and bear arms, because they assume that right will be abused. So it's better to disarm you now than run the risk of figuring out what happens when you do get around to abusing that right. So they actually consider us to be just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than the gangbangers. Because as we covered at the start of the show, when you look at the Gifford Center, they are praising gun criminals being given second chances and diversion programs to avoid going to prison. But they applaud when people like you or I, Josh, if we were to have a paperwork violation, or maybe we didn't check the right box, or maybe we bought a gun and we forgot to fill out, or we checked the wrong box in the background check form, right? They're more than happy to send us to prison for the rest of our life, but they are crawling over broken glass to have actual gun criminals kept out of prison in the name of inclusion, diversity, and equity. It is insane. Nothing about it is logical. Nothing about it makes sense. I'll give you the final word.
How long is it gonna last? I mean, you've got to be seeing this, thinking to yourself, what are people going to do when it's your father-in-law that gets busted for having a gun in New York, or your pastor for preaching in the streets? You know, if they're willing to criminalize your rights with this, what else are they willing to go after you for and do? Ask those January 6ers where they're at right now. Right?
Yeah,
every
week,
same thing.
It seems like every week, every month, every couple months, we hear stories of more January 6ers who have committed suicide. It's terrible. It's egregious. And they're still arresting people, Josh. They're still arresting people to this day.
I know.
They will arrest people up until the minute that statute of limitations expires. And once it does expire, they will pull the tricks that Alvin Bragg is doing in New York, and they'll find excuses to extend the statute of limitations by saying that they were committing terrorism, so they deserve a longer statute of limitations. They will do that. They will never stop until every single person they can conceivably throw in prison will be thrown in prison. Not because they actually caused any damage, but because their mere presence in society, according to them, poses a threat to democracy. And Josh, if you think you and I aren't on that list because we did a live stream that day covering it and giggling a little bit, we are on that list. We're all on that list.
Max, they painted us all as terrorists.
Yep. Yep, it's true. It's true. Well, we're out of time. It is Friday. Have a good weekend, everyone. That's it for this edition of the podcast. We have to do more happy podcasts because this is another example of a guy who just got railroaded. But if there's any consolation, I highly recommend, you can find it on Red State. The headline is Dexter Taylor gives fiery statement before judge hands down 10-year sentence for gunsmithing hobby. I highly recommend you read it because what's very clear is he's not going down quietly. He's going to appeal this, and he wants to take it all the way.
Help him fight, people. Help him fight.
Help him fight.
Help him fight.
Help him fight. Share this podcast so more people see it. People need to understand what
help us fight.
Going on. And if you like the podcast, subscribe. We're live on Rumble, YouTube, on X. So subscribe to us there. We also have the audio edition of the podcast. Subscribe everywhere you find that, and help us out. That's it for this edition of the podcast. My name is Max McGuire.
I'm Josh Hammerlin.
Remember, the fight to take back the country is not over yet, but the only way we win is if we all stand and fight together. See you next time.
See ya.